Welcome to the Catholic Theology Show, sponsored in part by Annunciation Circle, a community that supports the mission of Ave Maria University and this podcast through their monthly donations of $10 or more. If you'd like to support us, please consider visiting avemaria.edu/donate for more information. I'm your host, Michael Dauphinais, and today I am happy to have as my guest, returning guest, Joseph Pearce, who is the visiting professor of literature at Ave Maria University, prolific author, Catholic convert, and teacher, writer, speaker. Great to have you here, Joseph.
It's good to be back, Michael. Thanks for having me.
And it's great to have you on the show. It's great to have you teaching again for an intensive course at Ave Maria University. And I wanted to focus today kind of on a particular text of Lewis, but also on a large theme. And I want to begin with the theme because not everybody maybe has read the book. But the theme is really, Lewis believed that, he said at times that the imagination is not the cause of truth, but its condition. And so for us to believe in the truth of the Creator and creation, we have to kind of get rid of false images of the cosmos and replace them with better images of the cosmos. And when he was talking about, say, in The Problem of Pain, he said, we often in the modern world, we just imagine space as empty, dark, meaningless, a kind of a brute void, outer space. And so he thought that this made it kind of hard to imagine meaning and purpose. But he said it's really just an imagination, right? And so he wanted to recover a sense, what would it mean to think about the universe and the cosmos as filled with love? Filled with the radiance of God's glory. Right? And he loved Psalm 19, where it begins, the heavens are telling the glory of God, and the firmament proclaims his handiwork. So anyway, with that in mind, partly what we want to do today by looking at Out of the Silent Planet, the first of the Ransom trilogy, or what's often referred to as the Space trilogy, although we'll talk a little bit about why that name might not be the best, right, is how did you kind of maybe first encounter Out of the Silent Planet? What do you think Lewis was trying to do in helping us to kind of recover a sense of space as filled with kind of wonder and glory as opposed to something cold, empty, and dark?
Yes, a very, very good question. So I can't recall when I first read Out of the Silent Planet or the order in terms of the Lewis books I read. I remember the first Lewis book I read, which was Surprised by Joy. And of course, that's his autobiography and conversion story. And that turned me on to Lewis. And then I just couldn't get enough C.S. Lewis. So I then went through a period where I basically read probably most of his works in the space of a year or two. So I'm guessing it was that time, which would have been in the 1980s that I first read Out of the Silent Planet. But you're completely correct. There's a scene, certainly in either Out of the Silent Planet or Peverlander, I can't remember which one, where he's traveling through space, and the feeling he has is of it being full of not God's love, the wonder of God's presence, but also an angelic spiritual presence, that space was full of angels. And there's somewhere else in Lewis where he talks, we think about spirits as being sort of ethereal. So if you read the Iliad or the Odyssey, the Odyssey, and we go to the afterlife, the spirits after death are ethereal. They're shades. They're mere shadows of what they used to be. Whereas Lewis says this is the Shadowlands. And we become really solid after death. So he has this image of what about if ghosts or angels can pass through walls, not because they are thinner than walls, but that the walls are thinner than they are. That the walls, now in other words, physical space is like we experience air for them. In other words, the angels are actually much more solid than we are. And we can't see them, not because they are not solid, but because we are blind to their presence.
Yeah, that's, I think at one time, I think it's in Miracles where he says if we have to compare like spirit and matter, he says we should think about spirit being heavier than matter.
Exactly.
Right? Spirit is heavier, it's denser reality than matter. And in part this really is trying to help us to reimagine Because in a certain sense, we're never encountering the world as it is. We're encountering the world through our imaginative storytelling.
Yeah,
right.
Exactly. We're made in the image of God. We are the Imago Dei, and the imagination is the means by which we access reality. And without that imagination, we're not able to access reality. Every word is an image, right? If I say dog, if you don't speak the language, it's a monosyllabic grunt. But if you do speak the language, automatically, I am conjuring up in your mind a four-legged canine animal. So we have no choice but to work in images, and the imagination is the means by which we access the truth.
Right. Now, Lewis said that he and Tolkien they had the Inklings group. They would meet twice a week, in a pub. I think in two different pubs, right?
Once was in Lewis's rooms in Magdalen College, and the other was in the Bird and Baby, usually the Bird and Baby, the Eagle and Child pub.
That's right. Yeah, I actually was visited. I visited, England this past summer, and actually was able to walk by the Eagle and Child pub, but unfortunately it's been, I think, closed since COVID.
It's tragic.
Since the lockdowns.
It's tragic. Actually, if you don't mind my making a lamentation briefly, it says a great deal for the indifference of England to its heritage. That a pub like that, which is so significant to 20th century literature, 20th century history, to English history in the 20th century, is allowed to close down. It should be owned by the National Trust or English Heritage and just kept open as a place of historical interest. I mean, it should never have been allowed to happen. Anyway, that's my lamentation.
No, absolutely. Actually, I looked through the window, and it's weird. You can look all the way in the back, and you see there's a little like almost like a chalkboard or something. It says like, Lewis and Tolkien sat here or something, but through a closed window.
Yeah,
so
very sad.
Yeah, but Lewis and Tolkien, I don't think would be surprised. I think they would also, they spoke about how we were turning away often from the deeper, richer heart of English Western civilization and culture for a diminished vision of the human person, of the cosmos. Right. And this is the kind of the interesting question, is that somehow for us to discover an image of who we are as human beings with life and spirit, made in the image and likeness of God, we somehow have to, it was Lewis's conviction that we had to recover an image of the cosmos.
Yeah.
Right. And he has a famous book on medieval and Renaissance literature. It's probably one of his more accessible scholarly works. Called The Discarded Image. And the image is not the image of man, it's the image of the cosmos. And to a certain extent, right, if the whole cosmos can't somewhat reflect God, then the mini cosmos of man, which was often understood to be a microcosm of the cosmos, won't be able to reflect God either. Yeah. And so these recovering the macrocosm of the cosmos and the microcosm of the human person go together.
Absolutely. I mean, it's no coincidence that Lewis has Narnia created as a song, and that Tolkien has Middle-earth translated as the great music, because these men were part of that medieval heritage of Boethius' De Musica, where the cosmos is the music of the cosmos, the Musica Universalis, and then you have we are the Musica Humana. We are part of that music, and we're a special part of that music because we can actually make music ourselves. The music instrumentalis, subcreation as Tolkien would call it. We are creatures who can create. That's what makes us different from the rest of the cosmos, but we're all part of this great music. That's Tolkien and Lewis's understanding, which build up on a Christian Catholic understanding, such as that great work by Boethius. They're part of that living heritage, which, as you say, we have lost in the present times.
Yeah, and that's where Dante at the end of the Divine Comedy, right? It's that at the very end he's transformed, leaving hell, going through purgatory, arriving in paradise. That his will is now conformed to God's will, not simply to God's will, but to God's love that moves the heaven and the stars. So ultimately, it's God's love that moves the heavens and the stars and the sun, but also moves our wills. But our wills have to choose and have to be healed by grace in order to move along. Now, and again, so when we get back to Tolkien and Lewis in the 30s, Lewis has converted. They've been friends for a long time. And it's described that they began to notice how much the 20th century reader was captivated by science fiction, stories of space travels and time travels. And Lewis himself, I think it was in 1908, read one of H.G. Wells's books on a journey to the moon, which in some ways the Out of the Silent Planet is kind of modeled after a little bit. But so in 1908, he's like 9 or 10 years old, but he loves reading this book. And so what they notice, though, is that people love science fiction, and yet what's happening is this kind of atheistic vision is being imported into the science fiction. When you go out into science, when you meet aliens, they're not religious, they're not moral, they're just kind of intelligent powers that manipulate the world technologically. And so we look out into space, and what do we find? Well, we kind of find what we want to see, which is just kind of intelligent matter. Right? But we don't see love, beauty, wonder. And so they actually said, well, we should write works of science fiction that Lewis would say we could smuggle in Christian theology. In some ways, some of the early reviewers out of Silent Planet didn't even notice that it was filled with Christian symbolism, partly because they themselves probably were rather ignorant of it. And so they wanted to do this. And I think the story goes that Lewis took up space travel, and Tolkien agreed to work something on time travel. Lewis, being Lewis, I think within a year or so had written Out of the Silent Planet and published it, and Tolkien worked on drafts of his time travel, I think, until he passed away, correct?
And it was at his death never finished. Like actually most of his work remained unfinished when he died. That's certainly one of the differences between the two men. But you're completely correct. I mean, and as regards the ignorance of the modern world to theology, because I think it was because of the reviews of Out of the Silent Planet, very few of the reviewers understood what was going on the deeper theological level. I think that's what prompted Lewis to say that the modern world is so ignorant of theology, you can smuggle it in any amount of theology under cover of romance, and so it made him realize that even if it should be obvious, it isn't because of the ignorance of the modern world. But it was, this is all tied up with scientism, this idea that humanity is progressing from an ignorant past to a golden age in the future, ushered in by science and technology. So that it was Chesterton's The Everlasting Man, which addressed H.G. Wells's outline of history, which is, so we have H.G. Wells as a non-fiction writer who takes his scientism into the past and revisits and rewrites the past in line with this sort of arrogant, scientistic, progressive philosophy, and that's rebutted in a riposte by Chesterton, which is a major influence upon Lewis's conversion. But what Lewis is doing is the same thing here, because Wells also brought the same philosophy to science fiction novels, where that we're going to go out and we are going to conquer space as we've conquered time, and we are the master race of the cosmos, and we will basically we will conquer the future in terms of both time and space. So that arrogance you find in Wells's books, and Lewis does say, look, he's a great storyteller. I don't want to impugn him as a storyteller because he's a great storyteller, but basically there are problems with the philosophy, and the best way of rebutting the philosophy is to come up with a story of your own, right? Which can, if you like, fight Wells on his own territory on the grounds of mythopoeia, storytelling, right? And allow that to be the battleground. Who can tell the best stories, right? Which story is going to last? And therefore you have this battle of ideas in terms of fiction.
So in Lewis's story, then you get the two characters, the kind of the scientist who's committed to the expansion of humanity, this myth of progress, the march of progress ushered by science, and he wants to conquer Mars for the future of the human race. And then he's accompanied by Divine. That's Professor Weston, and then Divine, who is kind of the entrepreneur who simply wants gold, money. He wants wine and women, so to speak, is the way what really drives him is eventually finding a big yacht back in the in the Mediterranean. And so he's going there to plunder Mars for its gold, which it has in this story. And the interesting thing is Lewis says actually that the scientist filled with this myth of progress is more dangerous than the conqueror who simply wants gold.
Yeah, I mean, you mentioned the discarded image, and Lewis obviously is a medieval and Renaissance scholar. There's an element in which the divine and Western represent the two aspects of alchemy, medieval scientism, right? Because divine is just avaricious. He just wants personal empowerment through wealth. So he is sort of the one pursuing the philosopher's stone, how to turn base metal into gold. When he finds a planet which is full of gold, hey, presto, I've got it. I've got the philosopher's stone. It's called Mars, right? Whereas Western is the one looking for the elixir of life. How do we conquer death? We use science. We'll conquer space. We'll conquer the future. We'll conquer life itself, right? So he's the one that the alchemist who's pursuing the elixir of life. That's the two branches of medieval alchemy made manifest in 20th century literature and in the future, so to speak.
Yeah. And the thing we discover there is that they are willing, based upon what they understand, the creatures, the rational creatures they meet on Mars, and we'll talk about them in a minute, but they basically they want to kind of converse with a human and have a human meet their Oyarsa, or the kind of lord of that world. And they assume, because they see things as they would see things, and so therefore they think they're asking for a human sacrifice. So they basically end up kidnapping ransom. And so this is the irony, is that Weston, for the sake of the progress of humanity, will sacrifice human beings.
Yeah, absolutely, and that's exactly what we see in history. But it's the progressive ideologies, the French Revolution, the Marxists, the communists in China, and Soviet Union and the Nazi Germany. These are a shackle to progressive Enlightenment philosophies, the ones that butcher human beings in the name of progress and ideology. So, of course, Lewis is writing this in the late 1930s. This is all going on. So he can actually see when man starts worshipping man, he starts also murdering man at the same time.
Yeah. And so you get then a kind of an implicit criticism of this scientism or march of progress, saying, wait a second, there's a moral dimension of the human person which is being lost, right? This moral dimension of just right and wrong. And so when we go out on space travel, we actually should expect to find morality, right? And if there are other creatures, we should begin to recognize we have duties to them, they have duties to us. And this is what he begins to discover. And so, what happens, Weston and Divine actually end up shooting and killing some of the rational creatures of Mars. And it's kind of, they bring death. And that's when we begin to recognize, wait a second, we're the silent planet.
Right.
It's not so much that space is silent and empty. It's that our world is silent and empty. We no longer hear the music of the spheres or the stars. We no longer hear the music of creation. Not because creation itself doesn't sing, right? The heavens tell the glory of God. The firmament declares his handiwork, as Psalm 19 says. But what happens is that we've turned away. We've become tone deaf to beauty. We've become tone deaf in a way to goodness and morality, right? Because of sin. And I love the way Lewis describes this here as sin as a bentness.
Yes.
We are bent. How do you describe evil to people who, in this Mars world where they haven't yet had evil, or at least not, the creatures don't remember it, it's a bentness. So how do you see this kind of, as Lewis is trying to kind of awaken in the readers this kind of thirst for goodness?
Yeah, well, I think one thing he does, he creates a utopia. Now, the word utopia, if it's not originally, it doesn't mean utopia as in utopia, a good place. In Thomas More's utopia, it's utopia, no place, nowhere. Okay, so most utopian novels are showing us no place, and then particularly in the modern world with George Orwell and and Aldous Huxley and R.H. Benson, we have the dystopia, right, the bad place. But I think what Lewis is doing, both in Out of the Silent Planet and Perelandria, is showing us utopia, spelled E-utopia, the good place. In other words, he's showing us unfallen places. What would an unfallen place, a place that has not succumbed to original sin, what would that look like? And so you have here, three different species of rational creatures who take the guardian angel of their cosmos, of their planet, as their natural leader, because he's the representative of God. So it's one planet under God, and the three different species live in harmony because each of them, although they're different, they each of the different gifts that those different species have complement the gifts of the other species, and they harmonize with each other. They don't work with each other in a competitive way. They actually work together to make a cosmos which is better for all, the common good. So what Lewis is showing us is a utopia, good place. What happens if we weren't bent? What might things look like if we weren't bent, if he hadn't succumbed to evil, if we could hear the music of the cosmos, if we weren't deaf? And I think that's what he shows us in Malacandra in this novel.
In letter 18 in the Screwtape Letters, C.S. Lewis says that the philosophy of hell is that to be means to be in competition. So this is the philosophy of hell, and he goes on to show that hell can't see love. It doesn't believe love. It doesn't know what love means. It thinks that God is just telling some story about love, but we know that ultimately it's not love. He's out to get something, because hell can only imagine the world in competition with one another, and it actually thinks that competition is rooted in being itself. Matter is in competition with matter, and this is really the modern scientific empirical view. And it's interesting when you get to Dante's Divine Comedy in Paradiso, Canto 5, there it says, to be is to be in love. Because there, the question is, how could the saints at the lower parts of heaven still be utterly happy? And they say, well, simply to be here is to be in love, is to be in communion. Yeah. So we have a hellish view of the world, everything is in competition, and a heavenly reality, everything is in communion. Now, Lewis, of course, is not blind. He knows that there is tremendous competition, scarcity, fighting. But what Lewis wants to do is recover, the Christian vision, from the Old Testament and the New Testament through the Fathers and through the medievals, that the creation itself is fundamentally non-competitive. Right. It's fundamentally in communion with itself and with God. There's an initial harmony, and that disharmony came about through sin. So the competition, conflict, wars, slavery, all those different things that we see are actually the result of our sins, the result of our bentness, and Augustine will describe sin as, incurvatus in se, a curving in upon ourselves rather than opening up to God. So this idea that you can, therefore, we don't want to put competition in being itself. Because being itself is not merely material. Being itself is ultimately rooted in this spiritual dimension of intelligence, but intelligence that is also good, not merely an alien intelligence that's amoral, which is the one you get from the science fiction stories, but this idea that intelligence would actually have to be good. right? It would have to be love because it would be the perfection of all things.
Absolutely. So, I mean, Tolkien and Lewis shared a philosophy of myth, and it was actually Tolkien's philosophy of myth which was crucial in Lewis's conversion in 1931. And in his lecture and essay on fairy stories, Tolkien says first of all that fairy stories, and of course this is in some sense a fairy story, right? That they hold up a mirror to man. They show us ourselves. Now, a realist in a modern sense of the word, not the philosophical sense of the word, would say, they don't hold a mirror to man because we look at ourselves and our modern society and we see ugliness, we see death, we see war. But what Tolkien says is that the fairy story is not primarily about possibility, but about desirability. In other words, that we have to be the magic mirror that fairy stories show us have to show us not merely what things are, but what they should be and what they shouldn't be. So, in other words, to make the mirror not just a material mirror, but a moral mirror. And it's only by seeing perfection. I mean, we only understand ourselves ultimately by seeing Christ, and we can't be as good as Christ. But insofar as we see Christ and try to be like him, we actually become more fully human, more fully real, more fully who we are supposed to be. So the same thing in these stories, in showing us, the perfection of what we are called to be as human creatures in society, in communion, as opposed to being in competition. It allows us to at least then aspire towards a better life for ourselves and our neighbors in this world, but of course to aspire towards that perfect communion of heaven, which is the only place ultimately in perfection it would exist.
Yeah, that's really beautiful. And we're going to take a break. And when we get back, I want to look at this question. I want to go back. We want to talk a little bit about some of the details more of the plot as it unfolds. But I also want to think about this sense of if it's the silent planet that he's leaving and he's entering into this richer world of speech, right? The speech with God, that in a certain sense, this is kind of like it's also a bit of a conversion, right? He becomes converted from an older way, an imperfect, inadequate way of seeing the world and seeing himself and seeing God and desiring to a fuller way, right? And so I think this conversion of our desires as the kind of heart of storytelling, right? That and Lewis would say, right, that art and stories in the classical sense were meant to, right, delight and to instruct, right? They're kind of meant to both entertain us, but also to shape our desires. And, unfortunately, it's like I think they do. And so the question is, we better, than Lewis and Tolkien, I think, want to do is create stories that would shape our desires in a way that would lead them to that which can finally make us happy. So we'll come back in a moment after the break.
You're listening to the Catholic Theology Show, presented by Ave Maria University and sponsored in part by Annunciation Circle. Through their generous donations of $10 or more per month, Annunciation Circle members directly support the mission of AMU to be a fountainhead of renewal for the Church through our faculty, staff, students, and alumni. To learn more, visit avemaria.edu/join. Thank you for your continued support, and now let's get back to the show.
So today we've been talking about how C.S. Lewis wanted us to recover a vision of the human person in concordance with this recovered vision of the cosmos, right? That, and it kind of reminded of I think it was in the 80s or something, Carl Sagan would always be on TV. Carl Sagan was a kind of famous scientist who became kind of a popular scientist on TV. And he would always talk about there are billions and billions of stars within billions and billions of galaxies. And somehow this was meant to show us that we were unimportant and meaningless.
Right.
But of course, the irony that Lewis would talk about, because he talked about the same thing, well, there are two ironies Lewis would talk about. But the funny thing is Carl Sagan he's thinking about the fact that there are billions and billions of stars and galaxies, but the stars and galaxies are not thinking about him.
Yeah.
So in that very fact that we can be overwhelmed by that shows that we're somehow not matter. Yeah. There's a mind and there's a poetic and a reason in a poet and a reasoner in us. And the second thing he loved to point out that it was Ptolemy in the Greeks that already recognized that the circumference of the Earth was infinitesimal with comparison to what they considered to be simply the solar system. So the idea that man was in an insignificant place is a commonplace among the Greeks, the Romans, the Hebrews, and the Christians and the whole tradition. It reminds me of Psalm 8, right? When I look at the heavens, the work of your hands, the moon and the stars which you have established, what is man that you are mindful of him, and the son of man that you care for him? Right? You don't have to be a modern to ask this question, right? You can simply look, right, at a big body of water and feel your insignificance if you're in the middle of it, right? The Sea of Galilee can have storms that are big enough that you are afraid you're going to die, right? How many zeros you put after that doesn't change the basic fact. But he says, yet you have made him little less than God and crowned him with glory and honor. How do we recover, right, this sense that that the cosmos has a kind of glory and meaning and purpose, and so that we don't get overwhelmed by simply by numbers or space and size? And so I just want to read one or two things where Lewis describes this. Right, he says, when the first time he's journeying, and you're right, he journeys, by the way, across. Lewis loved this point so much that he has a ransom to it at the beginning of Out of the Silent Planet and also Paralandra, right? But I just love this idea. He had read of space, right? At the back of his thinking for years had lurked the dismal fancy of that black, cold vacuity, the utter deadness which was supposed to separate the worlds. The idea that space and emptiness is the reality, and then our existence is kind of the fluke. He had not known how much it had affected him until now, when he was actually in space in the story, that the name space seemed a blasphemous libel for this empyrean ocean of radiance in which they swam. He could not call it dead. He felt life pouring into him from every moment. Right? He had thought it barren. He saw that it was the womb of worlds whose blazing innumerable offspring looked down nightly even upon earth with its so many eyes. Older thinkers had been wiser, right? No, space was the wrong name, right? It should have been called simply the heavens which declare the glory of God. So, this idea, and at the very end, he writes this too, when he says, right, if we could simply help people by writing this book become familiarized with certain ideas, if we could even effect in 1% of our readers a change over from their conception of space to the conception of heaven, we should have made a beginning. By the way, of course, the irony is when this book gets published or often referred to, it's called the Space Trilogy. And the funny thing, as Michael Ward pointed out, who's a great Lewis scholar, but Lewis himself just says it, is that his whole point of the book is to get rid of the idea of space. Right. And it really should be called the Heavens Trilogy or the Ransom Trilogy. But
I have an edition of it called the Cosmic Trilogy, which is actually better.
Yes.
So I mean, the whole point here is that of course, as Hopkins says, the world is charged with the grandeur of God. And so are the heavens. One of the great philosophers ever was whoever wrote "Twinkle, Twinkle, Little Star, How I Wonder What You Are," because that's asking primary questions. But the clear thing is here that how I wonder. Right, the stars, however big they are, as Eustace says in Voyage of the Dawn Treader, in our world, a star is just a ball of flaming gas. And Ramandu says, who's a star, Ramandu says, even in your world, that's not all they are. And if nothing else, right? And of course, they contain all sorts of energy, and that's produced all sorts of cosmic occurrences. But they're also beautiful. But you need to have a being that can wonder what they are, that can see the beauty in something, that can see the presence of creation in created things. So you need a being that can see, a being that's made in the image of God, that has God's way of seeing things. And in that sense, of course, that each of us as individuals is infinitely and eternally larger than any ball of flaming gas, however far away it is.
Yeah. Stephen Barr, who is a Catholic physicist, but has also written a lot on science and technology and arguing that for the fundamental compatibility of science and the Catholic faith. And I remember he gave a talk here about 10 years ago, but even talked about, I think like probably something he went through among like the 30 great kind of scientific discoveries that really shape our contemporary scientific view of the world. About 20 of them were made by Catholics, right? Whether or not it's Mendel's, the monk who discovers genetics, or Lemaitre who discovers the Big Bang, or, so many others. But really, but the other thing he said is that scientists and physics, because he's a physicists have gotten so good at seeing what's in front of their eyes that they forget what's behind their eyes.
Yeah.
Right. And that's the thing, is we look at the universe and we discover it, and then we forget that there's the mind, our logos, which is immaterial.
Yeah, again, Chesterton's brilliant. He says, give me eyes to see my eyes, those terrible crystals made alive in me, more miraculous than all the things they see. We've forgotten how to see the wonder which is ourselves, because we've just looking at the matter in front of us. We've become blind to reality.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so that is then, I think, maybe that's really the key then to recognizing why our view of the cosmos shapes, in a certain sense, our view of ourselves. Because if we remember that part of the cosmos is the human creature, right? Part of the cosmos is a creature that can wonder at the cosmos.
We're the only part of the creature that we know of that can actually see the rest of the cosmos. The rest of the cosmos can't see anything.
Yes. Yeah, it really is beautiful. So let's just kind of, you mentioned a little bit that on this Mars world, this kind of utopian, this good place, there are three creatures. I think one are the Sorns, one are the Harasa, and then the Fiffletriggy, right? But could you say a little bit about why Lewis thinks that, or what's Lewis trying to get at in talking about how the three of them kind of make up rationality on this planet, and maybe what is he trying to get us to see about ourselves?
Well, first of all, I want to say how much I admire you for getting Fiffletriggy pronounced correctly, because I've been struggling with it for years. Yes. But so that helps me. Well, I think what he shows is that you have three different species. We have racism, and we have racial struggle, we have class struggle. We find it very difficult to get on with our neighbors because of differences. And here we have three, not just races, which are subspecies, right? But these are separate species, right? Look very different from each other in terms of shape, not just color. But these species live in harmony. They dovetail each other. So the Huasi are sort of the poets, and they like dancing and poetry and music. And then you have the Sorns, who are sort of like the philosophers, and the philosophers, but also the scientists in the best sense, natural philosophy, and how we bring the love of wisdom to an understanding of the cosmos. And then you have the say it again, Michael.
Oh, the Fiffletriggy.
The Fiffletriggy. Then you have the Fiffletriggy, and they're sort of like the engineers and the technologists that put the ideas of the Sorns into practice. And what I thought was also interesting, because Lewis is very good with respect to humor. So you see, in Magician's Nephew, that right at the beginning of the cosmos is laughter and jokes, right? And Aslan's part of the laughter and part of the joking. So we have here, he does point out the different sort of sense of humor that each of these races have, so the philosopher who's thinking a lot about things, that their humor is sort of very sort of restrained and nuanced and subtle, whereas the ones who are artists and poets have very rambunctious, jollity about their sense of humor, a sort of extravagant sense of humor. So the sense of humor difference, but what they have in common is laughter.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think he describes it when. I don't want to give away too many of the details of the plot, because I hope readers or viewers or listeners will pick it up and read it at some point. But at some point when he gets to the end and they're all together, all the special, all the three species come together, they just keep laughing, right? In this kind of, because they find each other's, they find each other humorous, right? It's somehow the poets kind of think the scientists are just, they don't understand them.
They're funny.
They're funny, and yet they, of course, they kind of are able to not take themselves so seriously or not take others so seriously because they take Oyarsa seriously, right? But they also have deep love and respect and cooperation.
My memory as well, again, without trying not to spoil anything, is that Oyarsa himself, who's the angelic being, also appears to laugh. And what is one of my favorite parts of the whole story is when this very serious, prideful philosophy of Western that he's expounding upon his sort of futuristic, progressive scientism, and he thinks that they're angry with him, and then he discovers they're actually laughing at him. It's what he's saying is preposterous. It's just silly. If you got a true wisdom, and certainly an unfallen wisdom, right, this sort of wickedness, right, is horrific. But then when he tries to rationalize the wickedness, it just becomes absurd, and at that point they just start laughing.
Yeah, that is a great scene, and Ransom actually translates Weston. Weston says these high-sounding things about the march of progress, the need to, sacrifice himself and others for the sake of humanity, and the great sense of their technology. And then it gets translated by Ransom into the solar speech, the old solar speech. And basically what he says is that, we big and strong, we throw things very far. We have big armies. We can kill people, lots of people. We kill lots of people quickly, right? And therefore we kill you because we bigger, stronger. So we kill you and we happy. We not sad. We not sorry. We kill and it's like basically that's because we can move things far and we can move big and heavy things far and fast, right? And we can kill far and big and fast. We now have a right to kill you and big and that's kind of the argument. Yeah. And you just realize that put side by side. Lewis thinks, of course, it's true, but he's also kind of like, what world would you rather be in? A world in which everything is just the bigger and stronger, throwing things, killing that's what I'm going to worship?
Yeah.
Or am I going to worship goodness, truth, and beauty and recognize that my experience of love, my experience of sacrifice is not in vain. It's not empty.
Right.
There is truth there that the kind of modern world is asking us to deny a fundamental aspect of our human experience.
Yeah, and the irony there, which Lewis is brilliant at, is that, of course, part of this supercilious arrogance of the futurists is imperialism, because that's what Western is, an imperialist. He wants to conquer the cosmos for his own species, right? But that's what has happened in the recent history, of course, with how these arrogant scientific people have conquered Africa and conquered in the name of power and wealth. And of course, what we do with those, the Europeans have done is we show them as being primitive, right? So that sort of language, when translated that you just read there, is the way that we depict them speaking to us, not because they're inarticulate, but because they don't speak our language well, right? So then we sort of look at them and say, well, you are obviously primitive because white man speak with forked tongue, that he's really turned that around there. That actually it's the arrogant imperialist with his stupid scientific futurist philosophy is the one who's primitive. And if you place him beside Plato or Aristotle, right, or Augustine or Aquinas, his ideas just are absurd. And that's what he's doing there. He's taking this out of its context into a good place. And from the perspective of that good place, you see the absurdity of it.
Yeah. What do you think Lewis wants us to recognize about ourselves with this complementarity of kind of rational or philosophical scientific thought ordered to the truth, technological thought ordered to making, and then kind of poetic thought ordered to enjoyment and memory?
Yeah, but well, also making, because that's
Making,
what
yes.
poiesis means. It's different types of making. Tolkien again talks about subcreation to the glory of God, subcreation for because it's good, true, and beautiful. Just because enjoyment. You use the word enjoyment. That's what it's for. It's there to be enjoyed, not for any utilitarian purposes. But then you have subcreation for utilitarian purposes, which is also good, because we do need to have tools and houses and clothes, and so all of these. This is a hierarchy of goods, not one thing's good and one thing's evil, but he's showing the poets and the technicians and the scientists and the philosophers all working together to make a world which lives in harmony with itself, and the various facets of making, right, whether it's poiesis or techne, all work to the good. If you keep evil out of the mix, it's all good.
Yeah. And I think this is important because there can be some people who will read Lewis and think that he has kind of an anti-technology basis, which is, I don't know, it's easy for me to, critique technology while living in an air-conditioned, building in Florida, or not, well, I don't live in a building, but living in a house that's air-conditioned, working on an air-conditioned, right, with microphones. But then you begin to say, wait a second. The issue is not the technology. The issue is the rejection of a principle by which and for which we use technology.
Yeah. So I mean, again, that Tolkien in The Hobbit, the narrator says in The Hobbit that all goblins make no beautiful things, but many clever ones, and it's not unlikely that they are responsible for many of the ingenious devices for killing large numbers of people at once, which have cursed our own world. So the point is, we have to know the difference between cleverness and wisdom. If we think just being clever is a good in itself, then our cleverness will lead to nuclear bombs and things which have tremendous abilities to cause mass destruction. But so cleverness is good, but only if it's guided by wisdom. And again, I love this metaphor that the poet Roy Campbell comes up with for human society. He uses the metaphor of a car, and the brakes are tradition. The steering wheel is wisdom, and the gas pedal, the accelerator, is progress, innovation. And the three have to work together, and he says we live in a society that's thrown away the steering wheel, refuses to use the brakes, has got its foot down hard on the accelerator. So if you think that cleverness and technology is the only thing that's going to deliver you from poverty or whatever you think the evil is, then you're going to crash, literally, because you've thrown away wisdom and you're refusing to listen to the voice of tradition.
It reminds me this Lewis wanting to show that there's a wholeness to reason, right? There's a wholeness to our being, again, in the image and likeness of God. If we need to recover the wholeness of the cosmos, we need to recover the wholeness of us. And this idea, right, that poetry discloses an aspect of truth and the human experience, in a way, why life is worth living in some ways, right, that technology never can. In the same sense, right, even philosophy, which can disclose truths, those truths become meaningful when they're connected to kind of images, right? And so, right, we have this kind of an orientation, like a reintegration of us, because of the fall, those parts of ourselves become discordant, and we can easily begin to worship poetry alone. Right? If we worship, Lewis is a poet, right? That was his first great work was Dimer, and he wanted to be a poet, not a prose author, and he sees, of course, his prose ultimately as being an expression of poetry. But if we take that and we separate it, then it becomes romanticism, and it will lead us astray. If we simply have reason, or the Sorns, or this emphasis on science or science or philosophy, we'll have rationalism.
Yeah.
And if we only have, right, this kind of just making technology, we'll have kind of a technologism, or sometimes what the popes will describe as a technocratic society. And so what he's saying is all those three things are good, but they become perverse when they're separated.
Yeah.
And, it reminds me that Pope Benedict, in an encyclical Spe Salvi, By Hope We Are Saved, He said that it is not science that redeems man. Man is redeemed by love. Right? But then he goes on to say that it's actually man is redeemed by the love of Jesus Christ.
Yeah.
Right? And so I think there's also something to be said here to Lewis wants us to also not only recognize, oh, that's how we should live and we should live that way, but to recognize we just don't live that way.
Right.
Actually observe human society, and you'll see there's a lot of conflict and oppression. Observe ourselves. If we can see that in the world, we can probably begin to notice in myself, I'm at war with myself. So how would you say that he also wants to kind of use this somehow to maybe spread the gospel, which is that we need a savior, right? And we can't save ourselves.
Yeah, I mean, I liked the way that you analogized the three species as representing the three ways of trying to understand reality that have to work together if we're not going to have chaos. So, if we worship beauty as an isolated thing, poetry is an isolated thing. You have the romantics who throw away their head in order to accentuate the heart. Then you have the empiricists of the Enlightenment who throw away the heart because they want to concentrate completely on their head. And then you call the technocrats, or perhaps another word for it would be utilitarianism, where basically it's all about comfort and just being clever enough to make ourselves as comfortable as possible. Now, those three things taken in isolation from the other two are destructive. But even those three things together, taken together, if they're not redeemed by Christ, are also not going to be working together, because they have to be held together by wisdom, and the ultimate wisdom, of course, is love. That's God is in the deepest sense. Wisdom is merely, should we say, the mind conforming itself to love, right? So that if these things are not that don't become, I suppose we could say, triune, right? If they do not become a manifestation of the divine, then they will war with each other. So that's why, all of those three species, are under the Eldila, right? They're under the angels, who are God's messengers. So this culture is under God and conforms and obeys the will of God. And that's why if there are any problems that they can't individually work out for themselves, they take it to the angels, right? They take it to the divine. And indeed, that ransom is taken to Iasa because the Eldila say that he's being summoned to them, and that's just going to be obeyed because it's clearly something which is good.
Yeah, you have that deep sense of that the cosmos and the macrocosm and the microcosm of man also can only really be they can only be understood if there's a creator of the cosmos, right? This reminded of Gaudium et Spes in Vatican II, where it said that, right, without the creator, the creature vanishes, right? We not only have to argue for the existence of God, we have to argue for the existence of creation, not just kind of a cosmic accident. But the beauty is when we see those all coming together, right, then we begin to say, wait a second, oh, here is a whole. And this is a whole that was glimpsed at even by, say, Plato and Aristotle and certain other maybe kind of, glimpsed at an organizing sense of the whole. But this becomes, right, the cornerstone of divine revelation is that, right, God is our creator and our redeemer, right? He was the creator and redeemer of Israel. He's the creator and redeemer of the whole world in Jesus Christ. So I think Lewis, right, is making a claim, right, that creation can only exercise its harmony, right, when it is under and in its creator.
Yeah, it has to be informed by the one who made it, exactly, and informed in the fullest sense of that word.
That's great. So, we are coming up to the end of our show today. So we've been talking today especially about how Lewis and Tolkien, but especially Lewis here, wants us to kind of step away from this kind of myth of progress, a myth of scientific advancement that somehow will sacrifice humans for the sake of humanity, and from this kind of dark, empty vision of space as fundamental reality, and to recover a deeper sense of spiritual reality, right? That love, goodness, truth, and beauty are real, and that those are kind of the more primary, right? Even Einstein could see that what the most incomprehensible thing about the universe is that it's comprehensible. Yeah. The fact that I can understand stars means that they follow a law higher than their material principles, and that there's a divine mind at work, and that divine mind is also filled with goodness, truth, and beauty, and that God has done something. Right? He's done something to solve our problems. That's one of the key themes too in Out of the Silent Planet, that God's doing something to rescue this planet. If people are interested in more of this topic, you might enjoy looking at one of our episodes that Joseph and I did on That Hideous Strength, which is the third book in the trilogy of the Ransom trilogy. And there are also a lot of good episodes on C.S. Lewis, the Chronicles of Narnia, and many other topics. And Joseph's been a regular guest on the show. Joseph, if people are interested in learning more about you or your work, is there a website you could direct them?
Yes. So the best one-stop place for me is my own personal website. I have a blog. I have an Inner Sanctum, and it's got a book section for purchase of my books. And that's jpearce.co, jpearce.co.
Excellent. Thank you for being on the show. Thank you so much for watching. If you enjoyed today's episode, please hit the like button and subscribe to the Catholic Theology Show. Thanks, and God bless.